You ever look at something like Stonehenge or the giant earthworks at Avebury and just your brain kind of short circuits trying to figure out how they did it? I mean, these are absolutely mind-blowing feats of engineering from thousands of years ago. Well, the official story all comes down to one surprisingly simple tool. But what if that whole story is a hoax? According to the source we're diving into today, it just might be. So let's get into it.
So yeah, how did they do it? How did ancient Britons dig ditches wider than a bus, using only what we call primitive tools? We're talking about shifting tens of thousands of cubic meters of solid chalk. I mean, just try to get your head around that. The ditches at Avebury alone are just enormous. With the tech they supposedly had, it seems pretty much impossible, right? So what was this miracle tool that made it all happen?
Well, for decades, the official story has pointed to this, the Antler Pick. Yep, pretty much what it sounds like, a pick made from the shed antlers of a red deer. This has been held up as the main earth-moving tool of the era. You know, the key that supposedly unlocks this whole mystery of how they built these massive monuments.
Okay, so before we start poking holes in the theory, let's make sure we understand the official story. This is the established narrative, the one you'll find in most textbooks, and it's all based on discoveries at some of Britain's most famous ancient sites.
So the idea isn't just pulled out of thin air. Archaeologists have found these antler picks, a lot of them, in the ditches at places like Stonehenge and in old flint mines. And here's the key part. Because they're basically bone, they're organic. That means you can radiocarbon date them. And those dates have become the foundation for the construction timelines of these incredible monuments. So on the surface, it all seems to fit together pretty neatly, right? A nice, tidy explanation?
But you know where this is going. What happens when you start pulling at the threads of that neat and tidy story? Well, it starts to unravel, fast. The source material for this explainer argues that the evidence for the antler pick being this, master tool of the Neolithic is actually incredibly weak. So weak, in fact, they call the whole thing a hoax. So the case against the antler pick really comes down to three major problems. First off, the dates are all wrong. A lot of these picks are from the Bronze Age, but the sites themselves are way, way older. Then you've got the tool marks left behind. They're all over the place, scattered and inconsistent, which suggests maybe they were used for scavenging, not for massive construction projects. And finally, there's just a shocking lack of evidence. The big ditches where you'd expect to find thousands of these things have these clean-cut profiles with almost no marks at all.
And that last point, the lack of evidence, it gets even weirder. Get this. At the massive Avebury site, you'd think they would have broken and thrown away thousands of these antler picks while digging that ditch. But nope. Excavators actually found more human bones in the ditch layers than they found antler picks. Now, if that's not a giant red flag, I don't know what is.
The author we're looking at today really doesn't pull any punches on this. The idea that these huge, clean-cut ditches were just chipped away bit by bit with a deer antler, to them it's just nonsense. It doesn't match the physical evidence, and it sure as heck doesn't match the logistical reality of what it would take to do that job.
Okay, so if it wasn't antler picks, then what was it? You can't just tear down a century-old theory without offering something better, right? Well, our source has an alternative, and this alternative paints a completely different picture of who these prehistoric builders really were.
The proposed alternative is something the source calls a Neolithic power axe. And trust me, this is a completely different beast from any axe you've ever seen. Let's break it down. First, you've got a super heavy stone head. We're talking roughly twice the weight of a modern steel one. Second, the handle was made of green wood, undried, which makes the whole thing even heavier. And third, the grip was short and thick, designed for big hands and for delivering these powerful close-up blows, not for wide swings.
Now, here's the really wild part. This tool wasn't just a tool. It was a system designed for a different kind of human. To even use this thing effectively, you'd need something like 30 to 50% more wrist and forearm strength than the average person today. The source connects this directly to a profile of what they called a megalithic builder. People who were bigger, stronger, with larger hands, literally built to wield these kinds of power tools.
So let's put these two tools head to head, right? For the actual job of cutting into solid chalk bedrock, it's not even a contest. The stone axe is way more durable, it's way more effective, and it's actually suitable for digging deep. The antler pick, for this kind of heavy-duty construction, it's just inferior in every single way.
All right, so we've got a new tool, a better tool. But why is this such a big deal? Well, because when you change the tool, you completely change the timeline. It totally redefined what was possible. It takes the construction of these monuments from a nearly impossible fantasy into a credible, doable engineering project.
Let's just go back to Avebury for a second to really grasp the scale here.
We're talking about moving 96,000 cubic meters of chalk. That is an astronomical amount of rock to move. And figuring out how many hours that would take is the key to knowing if a project like this was even possible.
And this, right here, is where the rubber meets the road. Using the old Antler Pick model, digging that ditch would take, wait for it, 1.5 million work hours. Staggering. But with the power axe, that number absolutely plummets to 500,000 hours. That is 3 times faster. All of a sudden, this project isn't some century-spanning epic. It's something that could actually be achieved in a reasonable amount of time.
But hold on, because it gets even better. The source argues that these builders were smart. They weren't digging in dry, hard chalk. They were working in a wet landscape, and they used that water to their advantage, to soften the chalk and make it easier to dredge out. So when you combine the power axe with this kind of water-assisted engineering, the productivity gain is up to 8 times faster than the old Antler Pick model. That's not just an improvement, that is an absolute game changer.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It means we have to rethink everything. Not just the tools they used, but the builders themselves. This isn't just a small correction to the history books. This is a completely new model for understanding who these people were and what they were capable of.
Okay, let's just recap this new model. We've got builders who saw a wet landscape not as a problem, but as an advantage, using water to help them engineer. Their main tools weren't flimsy antlers. They were heavy-duty power axes designed for powerful users. This whole system led to a productivity gain of 3 to 8 times. And that right there is what makes these monumental projects finally seem credible, logistically possible without needing to imagine fantasy timelines or impossible numbers of workers.
And that really gets to the heart of it all, doesn't it? The so-called hoax isn't just about one bad tool. It's about an entire model of engineering, an entire mindset that has completely underestimated our ancestors. We've pictured them as these primitive laborers just chipping away for centuries with bad tools. But this new theory, it paints them as what they probably were, sophisticated engineers who understood their environment, designed powerful systems, and were way, way more capable than we've ever given them credit for.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question, doesn't it? If a story this fundamental to our understanding of the past could be so wrong for so long, what else are we wrong about? What other widely accepted hoaxes might be hiding in our history books, just waiting to be uncovered? Makes you think.